Better. You and Harry Daniels.
There are a lot of good economy cars in the world. Now, Mazda introduces a great one, announcing the all-new 1981 Mazda GLC. All new with front-wheel drive, fully independent.
Suzanne?
Well, I ain't going to be heavy this morning. Too goddamn confusing to be heavy.
And flakes of chicken? New?
New from Maple Leaf. Tender white chicken for tasty sandwiches, ideal in salads. Anywhere you'd use salmon or tuna. A delicious change of taste.
Nice change. Tastes terrific. Let me guess. Flakes of chicken?
A delicious change of taste. Tender white chicken. New Maple Leaf flakes of chicken.
Webster is next on BC TV.
Good morning. By the end of the century, more or less, Vancouver will be totally transformed by the massive injection of the provincial government of a thing called BC Place. If you understand what's happening, you're a better man than I am, Gunga Din. BC Place, Transpo 86, a new stadium before the other one falls down. But this is, roughly speaking, the 200 acres on the north shore of False Creek, which, starting very shortly, is about to be transformed. What it's going to do to the city of Vancouver, the Lord alone knows. But I have the people here this morning who should have the answers. Stephen Rodgers, the Social Credit Cabinet Minister. He's the guy with a moustache, youngish-looking fellow when he's not in real life, who's the minister in charge. And on his right is Alvin Narod, who's going to run the BC Place thing. And I hope he lives until the beginning of the next century. Apart from that, this morning, we're going to speak to a man freshly back from London causing trouble about our poor, benighted constitution. His name is Duke Redbird, and he is a Metis. And also, just to bring back the nostalgia of the 60s, Myrna Kostash, a woman who has written a very good book on the troubles of the 60s. But before I forget, and in case you're interested, I'm going to have a little chatty poo with a man with a pipe to see what, if anything, happened at the Social Credit Convention over the weekend, except, of course, for the Women's Auxiliary wanting to officialize prostitution. After the break. I was hoping to have Premier Bennett here this morning, fresh from his Ottawa bashing at the Social Credit Convention, but instead I had to settle for Harvey Oberfeld. Where has he gone this time?
I don't know. I think today he might be in Vancouver. He might have gone to Kelowna, but he's done his thing at the convention.
Was there any reason given for his long-term hibernation before he finally came out on the budget?
No, he just wanted to let his ministers talk about it, so he said, but he was probably the only premier of the country who took so long to come.
He was the low man on the totem pole. We'd lost all interest in what he was about to say, and he didn't say much anyway, except for what, a 60-day cooling-off period?
60-day
what did he mean by
that? He wants two national conferences, one on the budget, one on the Constitution. You know, but he can't lose when you think of it. Because if Trudeau decides to, okay, let's try it one more time, Bennett's going to look great. If Trudeau says no, at least Bennett's going to be able to say, we tried, we're doing the right thing, and it's now up to Trudeau.
Trudeau has already told the provinces to go jump in the nearest lake, has he not?
Yes, but he could always, he's having trouble in England though, so he could change his mind. He could say, let's try it once more, let's just show Britain that it's not working out. And if he has that conference, Bennett would look pretty good.
Has Bennett got control of the party, or has he not got control of the party? People like you and the rest of you have been talking about trouble in the caucus, rebellion, not just Kemp, other people. Has he got control of the Social Credit Party or not?
He's got control, but they're not terribly happy with him. There are more and more people saying, you know, he's doing his best, and but let's face it, he's not his dad. You know, he's not his dad, and a lot of people are disappointed that he's not performing the way his dad would have handled some of these situations.
There are no contenders even on the horizon for his job, are there?
Not out open, not out in the open.
Okay, who's in the back room saying they want to be premier?
They're not saying it, but people keep looking over towards Bill Vander Zalm. They look over towards Mayor. They keep looking over towards people like maybe even McClellan eventually down the road. But those people either don't have the guts or don't think it's the time right now to say anything, because you can't get rid of a premier while he's in office.
His membership.
But if there's an election and he loses that election, you'll see them all start coming out.
What's all this nonsense about planning a spring election? Do you believe in that?
No, I don't think so. They're in very bad financial shape, and he's got to
What do you mean, no $1,000 bills this year?
No, not this year. It'll be a couple of years. Remember that Curtis, months ago, ordered a staff freeze, ordered ministers to cut back. They're in bad shape. It's nothing to do with...
We're talking about the party, not the government.
Well, you're talking about the party. I'm talking about the government itself is the one that's going to decide whether there's going to be an election. It's going to be Bennett's decision. The party just goes along with whatever he decides and whatever the government decides. But I don't think they're ready for an election financially. The party and certainly the government isn't. They still have to build up their surpluses. They've got to be able to get some things on stream, and I can't see them going now.
Think of the screaming about the natural gas overall tax, export and domestic, the throughput tax. Yeah. What does it actually mean in cash to BC?
Well, it means to you and I it'd be a lot of money, at least to me. It would be, it's about $250 million a year. But when you look at the overall provincial budget, it's less than 2%. And that's the whole irony of what's going on now, that the way they're making it sound, it's as if BC is going to go broke over this one tax. And they've already passed on the tax to domestic consumers as of last Saturday, but they're making it sound as if they're still going to go broke. What they're trying to do...
You mean the increase in domestic natural gas?
That's right.
And then he's going to have to take away some of the subsidy on domestic natural gas, and our gas bills are going to go up 25–30% before the next election.
Well, that's the problem. I think they were counting on raising that to get back some tax money. But what I think he's trying to do, and we'll have to wait till the budget, I think he's trying to set us up for tax increases, and rather than blame it on himself, he's going to blame it on the federal government every time he increases a tax. And that's
maybe this constitutional crisis bit is going to get him altogether away from Lettergate, Eckhart. What was the other one? I forget.
Well, you've got Eckhart, you've got the electoral reform, you've got the dirty tricks, the letter writing.
Yeah,
people, you had the code of ethics. Remember last year they promised a code of ethics would be back this year.
You mean George Lenko?
George Lenko's recommendations, it wasn't even dealt with in any great detail at the convention. Now Jerry Strongman, the man who chairs that committee, is gone. He stepped down as vice president. And they said they might report next year, so I think that's pretty well gone by the wayside. Mm-hmm. I don't think we'll see
Where's
much.
Bennett gone on this current holiday?
Who knows? He doesn't confide in me for some reason. But he's just taking a couple of days off. He'll be back Wednesday, and he'll. Who knows if Trudeau
he'll be back
responds.
Wednesday?
He should be back in the office.
How's wee Davy Barrett?
Well, if you can find him, let us know, because he's saying back, if you've noticed, he's hiding off to the side. He figures Bennett's doing it to himself, and he doesn't want to say anything that's going to embarrass himself. So he's just sitting back, letting them do it to themselves.
What are you going to do now?
I'm going to take a day off, and then I'm going to be back Wednesday.
Unemployed. Harvey Oberfeld, unemployed for tomorrow only. Thanks, Harvey. What do you smoke in that pipe anyway?
Well, I could put the station off the air. No, it's just regular tobacco. Mm-hmm. Just regular tobacco.
Yeah, you and I have both got to lead forward to hide our bellies on camera.
That's right.
Makes you look a whole lot better.
That's right. Look how slim I look.
Oh, you need a good imagination to see that. Thanks, Harvey. We call him hardly underfed in the business. His real name is Harvey Oberfeld. Next, we're going to try and find out fact or fancy about BC Place et al. After the break. 9 months ago, Bill Bennett, the Premier of BC, gave birth to an became pregnant with BC Place. Today, as of last weekend anyway, it is firmly announced. And if you can tell me right now what BC Place is, who's going to own it, who's going to buy it, who's going to run it, and who's going to pay the deficit, you're a better man than I am, Gungadin. So I have here today, Stephen Rodgers. For the purpose of this, not the Environment Minister, but the Minister in charge of BC Place. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you, sir, your name again?
Alvin Narod.
And you are what?
I'm the chairman of British Columbia Place, a Crown corporation.
And you're the man that's going to shepherd this through from its birth now to its total development by when?
From its birth in March of 80 to the stadium being completed in July 83, and the final development running till the mid-90s.
Can you tell me right now if there are any firm plans for what BC Place is going to be?
No, the only thing that's firm right now is the location and the design and the construction schedule of the stadium.
The only thing that's now firm, that you've got plans for and money for, is...
No, we have the money to buy the land. We have money to acquire the land. But the only thing we've been asked to fast track, and the only thing we have fast tracked, is the stadium, because as you know, it's a very nice one you're holding there, Jack.
Would you please not use words like fast track?
Well,
what do you mean by fast track, Mr. Minister?
We mean by fast track is the stadium at Empire Stadium is going to fall down. It has some serious engineering defects, and as you know, it's going to be closed by the spring of '83, and therefore we have a time frame that requires us to build a stadium as quickly as possible.
Right. This is not a waterbed. This is a model of the stadium. See? We'll show you bits and pieces of it later. When do you start to build the stadium?
Start clearing the land in January. By the end of January or early February, we hope to be into excavation. The roof should be on by mid-82 and the building complete in '83.
That's fast tracking.
Who's paying for this?
Government of British Columbia.
In total?
Yes.
How much will it cost?
The stadium?
No, well, let's ask Alvin. How much will the stadium cost?
Stadium is $115 million.
Is that construction alone or construction and land?
That's construction, design fees, but not land.
How do you know you can build it for $115 million, or does it not matter whether it goes to $150 million?
Certainly does. We've hired staff. We have a comprehensive staff of our own. We've hired consulting engineers, and we've also hired a construction manager. All three of these people have produced facts to create this budget of $115 million. But that's not the end of it. We hope to, before we actually start the physical construction, have a guaranteed maximum price from our construction manager, which will be bonded to the extent of 100%.
Can you do that
Yes,
nowadays?
yes.
You mean to say if you were in business, you'd give somebody a price 2 years down the road, a firm guaranteed maximum price?
Yes,
No strike clauses?
that's right.
You'd have to have a no strike clause to guarantee anything, wouldn't you?
No, you take that risk. The construction manager will take that risk.
All right, let's dispose of the stadium. The stadium is a fact. It's not fancy.
That's correct.
And the stadium will cost less than the roof in the one in Montreal.
Say that in a louder voice, please, but don't fast track it. Say it slowly.
The entire cost of this stadium will be less than the cost of putting the roof on the Montreal Stadium.
How much was the Montreal Stadium again?
Over $800 million the last time I saw
Okay,
it.
I've got that quite clear. Okay, let's accept your stadium as a fact and not fancy, and show me the graphic on the kind of concourse that's going to be on this stadium. And these are firm plans. We should have a monitor. You'll have to look up there to see the monitor. Can't see it very well. Bring it back a bit so I can see the part of the stadium as well. What do I see there? Upper concourse, club level, lower concourse. There it is now. Now draw it back and let's see how that goes over the field. Oh, it's on ENG. We can't draw it back. Too bad. I thought it was in the frame. Okay, show me now, please, the plans looking down on the stadium and tell me what we see. Alvin, if you'll turn around and look at the monitor. Let's see it. That is the full stadium, and what does the yellow area indicate?
The yellow area in the middle is the Canadian football field. The black line extending around the a little higher and lower in the middle is the soccer field.
Okay, let's see the next one as soon as it comes up. So this is all set for baseball, soccer, Canadian football, and what else?
We'll have a half configuration to take care of indoor soccer, tennis, basketball, any other thing that requires a smaller field than the full configuration.
There's the baseball one now, if you look around and see it.
Yeah.
That's a funny configuration, but I don't know baseball, so I don't know why it's...
Well, you'll notice that we've taken out a big batch of seats on the upper side and slid them elsewhere to make room for baseball in the same configuration.
Let's finish on the stadium right now then. $115 million starts when?
Starting January 81.
January 81. Finished when?
July 83.
Do you believe the one at Empire Stadium's actually fallen down?
In
Falling
part,
down?
Well, in part it is.
Is that not just alarmist talk from the minister?
I haven't gone and looked at it.
It's not really falling down. Are you telling people shouldn't go there in case the roof falls in?
No, but they have a problem that will be very serious by 1983. They've identified it. In any event, that's not within our mandate. We were just told to go ahead and arrange to and build a stadium for 60,000 people in downtown Vancouver. And I've asked Mr. Narod to be the chairman. He's accepted. He's hired a president, a staff, and we're underway to build BC Place. Why we haven't talked to people like you and the press and others is we've been involved in some rather detailed negotiations with Marathon Realty over the acquisition of the land, which we announced on Thursday.
Just one question for me. There's no hockey, obviously, in the downtown stadium. That's got to stay out at the PNE. That's the big crowd getter in Vancouver. How the devil can that place stand on its own feet with a couple of dozen football games, a bit of soccer, and no baseball league here yet?
Well, Seattle is a city just a little larger, the greater Seattle just a little larger than Vancouver. They have occupancy of about 225 uses per year. That's not counting days for changes, etc. They've got baseball. Well, we expect to have baseball. These other fields, then it'll be available for religious concerts, boat shows, any large gathering. Conventions, large ones.
But if there is a deficit, your government will pick up the deficit in the operation of the stadium. Is that correct?
We don't expect there to be a deficit.
Well, I've got to ask you the
and,
question.
and by the way, you passed over hockey very lightly. From an engineering point of view, it's quite possible to put an ice surface in the stadium.
But it's going to stand on its own feet. Will the city of Vancouver pick up the deficits on the stadium if it gets into the old problems the stadiums sometimes get into?
Well,
the city of Vancouver has nothing to do with it in that respect. It's a provincial enterprise, a Crown corporation. Many of these other stadiums in the country operate on a profit-making basis if you exclude debt service.
And the debt service, in this case of Nestor, will be picked up by the Crown Corporation with the provincial government behind it.
And that will be compensated for by the sale of the land that we develop and make available to private developers.
Now you're going into the big concept.
Yes.
I just wanted to get the little waterbed out the way. 60,000 seats, right?
Right.
$115 million.
Right.
Already before Empire Stadium falls down, said he with a little smile on his face. Next, Transpo and BC Place, after the break. BC Place is a grandiose plan. Mr. Narod, you give me the have you finally made land deals with the Marathon CPR? Have you got firm contracts on everything you're going to swap and deal with on the CPR basis?
Yes, we've signed a document last Wednesday, which is an enforceable document on both sides. We must deliver and they must too, and the closing is on December the 1st.
Right. What is the deal?
We pay them a total value of $60 million, which comprise of approximately $30 million in cash and $30 million in trade properties. Now, the trade properties are scheduled in our agreement, and some of them are not 100% firm. However, there's a formula within the agreement that says if we can't finally deliver one or two of those properties, we have the right to pay Marathon in cash. So whereas all the dots aren't dotted and the T's aren't crossed, the deal with Marathon is firm. They must deliver when we deliver the money.
Marathon get $30 million in cash, $30 million in valuable downtown trade properties.
Correct.
If you can't deliver, for instance, the federal building site office, the post office.
That's correct.
You've got to come up with a sum of money in lieu of that.
That's correct, and it's agreed.
And that's agreed money.
Right.
Now, what do you get in return for this?
We get 175 acres of land, plus the Kitsilano trestle, plus the Dunsmuir Tunnel, which by itself has been estimated by city officials as being of $25 million value to the city for urban transit.
Well, let me get this clear. You get 175 acres
Yeah.
on the north shore of Falls Creek.
That's correct.
Which at one time Marathon had planned with the city of Vancouver, a complex of mixed housing, expensive and low rental. And then the city and Marathon blew apart in that, and Marathon withdrew, correct?
That's correct.
From the north shore of Falls Creek.
They blew apart on the low rental.
On the low rental. You have now gone in and you're saying, we're getting that 175 acres, you're getting your $60 million deal. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So that 175 acres plus some other land is the basis of BC Place.
No, the tunnel and the trestle are the two other pieces. The Dunsmuir Tunnel, running from Cole Harbor through to Falls Creek.
You mean the old underground CPR
right.
rail tunnel?
That's right.
Yes.
Yeah.
The one that rumbles underneath some of the offices downtown?
That's correct.
That's correct. That's of significant value to the rapid LRT system which we expect to come.
Obviously a good deal. That one is. And then the Kitsilano Trestle.
Well, they threw it in. We don't know what the plans are for that.
Well, we
may tear it down.
hope to remove it as soon as we can remove the rail corridor, which requires approval of the Canadian Transport Commission. As soon as that's received within approximately 2 years, we hope to tear down that trestle to improve the water flow through that narrow gap and for boats and for water.
Does this mean the
cleanliness.
removal of all CPR tracks from the north shore of Falls Creek?
Yes, eventually.
Eventually.
Phased out over 2 years.
Now,
Perhaps a little longer if it takes longer to get Canadian Transport Commission approval for the last rail.
so here you are with this Crown Corporation. You're sitting there with that tunnel, the Dunsmuir Tunnel, Kitsilano Trestle, 175 acres.
Yes.
Your own 25 acres. Or you've got some other land in there, haven't you?
There's some other land that belongs to the BC Hydro, which we hope to negotiate with them.
Okay. Have you any plans for the overall concept of BC Place?
We've been working for the last several months on producing some, but we have nothing finite. We're producing, our main thrust to this date was to get the stadium started, because the site being big enough that we could say this is where it shall go and we'll make everything fit. We've done that in concert with the city officials of the City of Vancouver, and they are in agreement with the location and general shape of the stadium.
But they don't know what you're planning to do
Our
in
future
BC
plan,
Place.
we don't know yet.
You don't know either.
We're still in the process of designing. We have a general idea, but nothing fixed.
How are you going to finance BC Place?
We're going to finance it. Included in the financing that we have will be sufficient money for us to create the infrastructure, which means the sewers, the roads, the water, the electricity, etc., all underground, which we will install in advance for the long-range plan that will last for 20 years.
Are you telling me that the City of Vancouver will not install that?
No, the city will not.
BC Place will
BC
put
Place.
all the, don't call it infrastructure, services.
The services within our property. We expect the City of Vancouver to provide services off-site.
To the property.
To the property. And we don't anticipate those being huge. We don't know what they'll be yet.
So what
The main servicing of the site will be done by us.
All right, we'll see you get 200 acres. And you can, I suppose, sell the Dunsmuir Tunnel to the eventual light rapid transit.
That's correct, but we don't forget we also have to be the landlord for the 6-month World Fair called Transpo 86, which will be with us by the spring of 86.
Just leave the Transpo 86 for the moment. But you're starting out with this lump of land, a tunnel and a bridge.
Yes.
And a stadium.
Yes.
Right. And you're, I presume, going to flog off this property as inflation continues to finance BC Place.
That's correct.
Am I right?
That's correct. In an orderly way.
It's as simple as that.
In an orderly way to create an urban landscape that's attractive and useful to the City of Vancouver.
The only thing I can remember what the Premier of what the Premier said about BC Place was an avenue of the provinces. What is BC Place actually going to be?
It's going to be a large mix of all various things, and we don't know the size of the components, but it will include all ranges of housing, offices, retail, and various community facilities. But when we're talking about what the Premier says, let's go right back to the original concept. This thing started out by the offer of Marathon to sell 30 acres of land to the province and lease the remainder of the land to the corporation for the use of Expo. The Premier, in his judgment, decided that what the heck was the point of the citizens of British Columbia putting on this fair, doing all these improvements to make that land of marathons a lot more valuable. And it was his initiative that required us to go ahead and purchase all of the land for the benefit of British Columbia.
Now I've got just leave
And
out.
I'm not political.
Yeah, I was going to say leave out the political nonsense. Leave that to Stephen Rodgers. I just want to try and understand this.
Okay.
You've given $60 million in cash and properties, more or less, to Marathon, which is a CPR.
Yes.
You've taken 175 acres of tunnel and the old trestle.
That's $342,000 an acre, or $7.48 per square foot, I think it is.
How does that stand in today's market?
$7.84.
How does that stand in today's market?
Well, I think it's a bargain. If you relate it to
Did the CPR
property,
ever give anybody a bargain in their lives when they didn't have to?
No, they didn't. And the essence of every deal is that everybody's got to look good and be able to say he won something, and that's true with this one. But our property is purchased at $7.84 a square foot. Land in the downtown core of Vancouver is selling at between $200 and $300 per square foot today. Now, that's developed land. Ours is undeveloped land. We have the opportunity to increase our values by developing it, and then we've got the potential for upgrading, and we won't get to the same price as downtown core, but we'll approach it.
Do you have to get zoning from the city, or can you do what the devil you like?
We're not taking the approach that we can do whatever we like. As we're a government crown corporation, we can do things by fiat, but we're trying to do it in a cooperative way with the city.
But you won't have to go to public hearings on this, that, and the next thing.
No, but we have a task force with the senior officials of the city of Vancouver, and we're working with them.
So what we can see now, I'll not be here. You will, of course. But what we can...
You moving to Toronto or something?
God knows where I'm going. What we've got is a new... I'm going to say downtown. A new half of Vancouver. It's a new waterfront downtown for Vancouver and False Creek. Run not by the city of Vancouver, but by BC Place, the Crown Corporation, and creature of the provincial government. Is that right?
Correct, yeah.
Well, Barrett, do.
Well,
Can he nationalize it, or is this already state socialism with a little bit of free enterprise rip-off involved in it? How would you put that, Mr. Narod?
I don't think there's any rip-off. We're going to be the ones who are going to be making sure that free enterprise pays its pound of flesh to get the use of this land. I think that if Mr. Barrett were in charge, he would be fully in favor of this, with the only proviso that he'd probably want more accent on low-cost housing.
Because you ain't going to put much of an accent on low-cost housing in
We're
this fancy
quite
Dan
willing.
district.
We're quite willing to provide low-cost housing, but we're not going to subsidize it within our corporation. All subsidized housing corporations comes directly from
Stephen.
we've said that all
federal
along.
programs.
Big for his boots already. He's just running BC Place, and he's telling you what you're not going to have in BC Place, and you're the minister in charge.
Jack, we've said it all along. It's just that because we say it, it's assumed that we don't mean it. But we've said there will be a full range of housing. There are going to be 20,000 units of housing in BC Place.
But very few for the common people.
Oh, no. But remember, the cost of building a house or housing units, they're going to be the same no matter who you're building them for. If you want to subsidize them, that's not within our mandate to subsidize them. But if the federal government wants to subsidize them, or some other agency wants to subsidize them, that's fine. We'll be able to provide them with the land on which they can build.
Or if social credit government decides to get re-elected, it may subsidize them. But you're speaking in your capacity as in charge of BC Place.
In charge of BC Place, and if we don't get proper value for the land down there, then you're going to say, but your stadium lost money. You people aren't organized. You promised us that we were going to be able to do
I'll
this
bet
thing.
you the city of Vancouver officials who run the place are really screaming at you, dumping this in the middle of
I don't think so. I think they must be pretty pleased, because this has been sitting around their neck like an albatross for years and years and years, and they hadn't the wherewithal to deal with Marathon.
Okay, dare I tackle Transpo? Manning is here. Dare I? I suppose to round out, we've got to do a segment with, what's his name, Paul Manning. Just before I turn to Transpo, is the federal government committed in any way to help you in this whole thing? Or do you expect a wheelbarrow full of millions of dollars from them. It's a gesture towards the separatist West.
I wouldn't mind how they send it, but we have invited them to participate in the project in terms of a federal presence.
But you're not counting on their money, is that correct?
We're counting on their money for Transpo, but not for BC Place.
For Transpo, which brings me to Paul Manning. Proper title, please, Paul, on this occasion?
Coordinator for the Committee for Transpo.
Okay, now how does Transpo fit into BC Place? And which came first, the chicken or the egg, Transpo or BC Place?
Well, two things were...
Because, let me finish, because every exposition that we've had about recently in this country, to wit Montreal, finished up as a financial disaster with bits and pieces all over the country.
Okay, well, two things there. There was a stadium question going on, and before the stadium question was involved, the government was looking to a World's Fair that might commemorate the city of Vancouver's 100th birthday. They came up with an idea for a transportation exposition. 1 out of 4 jobs in BC are involved in transportation. We've got land, air, water, all within the city. We're the western terminus or the old Gateway Pacific Rim, all these things that go on. As Alvin said earlier, it made sense to come, rather than leasing the land, to own the land. And the difference between what we're doing in Montreal is one of scale, because Montreal would be something like 10 times in a physical scale larger than ours. They had to build 2 islands in the middle of the St. Lawrence. The cost of Expo included a lot of things, such as building the islands, such as permanent pavilions that went in, such as some metro subways. Now the difference is 3 years later they had the same thing in Osaka, where Montreal supposedly lost $250 million if you put everything in. Osaka made $250 million because they didn't charge the infrastructure. And the difference with how this is going to work is, rather than like Montreal, which is left with a number of buildings that sit there and they can't fill them, what we will do with Transpo is, with BC Place, decide what are those things that Transpo is going to bring, aside from being the catalyst for rapid transit. But on the site, those things which are going to be permanent at Transpo will be planned to fit in with the overall of BC Place.
I get the concept. You said Alvin Narod of BC Place will in effect build Transpo so that it becomes a permanent part of your scene instead of a passing fancy for 6 months in 1986. Is that right?
Well, in general, except that we don't have the say as to what is going to be built for Transpo other than anything that is going to remain after Transpo. It's in the province of the Transpo committee to decide what they want to build. We are their landlord, we provide them the land, and we'll provide them the buildings if they ask us to build them for them.
And you'll put in the basic services for whatever is going to be in BC Place, including Transpo.
Right.
Now, what is going to be in Transpo? Because there's a guy called Harcourt, our city, Harcourt, you know the guy, who says if he becomes mayor, he's going to sabotage it. Or what's to that effect? He doesn't want it. Can any mayor of Vancouver sabotage Transpo 86 at this stage, gentlemen?
Okay, well, let's go backwards. Canada is host nation to Transpo. You don't award a World's Fair to a city or to a province, you award it to a country. And we've gone through the Canadian delegation to the Paris-based Bureau of International Expositions. That's how we get it. Number 2, the idea was a provincial...
And we've got it.
We get it November 26th, and certainly lining up this land pretty well ensures it. Second thing is it's a provincial initiative. So you don't, it was the province's idea, which had the unanimous support of the City Council of Vancouver. For whatever reasons, Mr. Harcourt might not like it now, but at one time he voted in favor of hosting it.
Is he stuck with it?
I think he's pretty well stuck with it. Whether or not he's mayor is hypothetical, and whether or not he could have a council that agreed with him on what he might like to do is hypothetical.
What do you say to that, Stephen? You're the politician here, the full-time one.
Canada does apply for this World's Fair. I'm on the committee for Transpo. We've gone through the process. We've been to Paris. We've made our presentation. The official request comes from the federal government to hold Transpo. So Mr. Harcourt may not like what's going on in his city if he is the mayor, but as far as I'm concerned, it's provincial government participation in this project means it'll go ahead.
Now, can you give me an idea? We know what the stadium's going to be. It looks good. Here's the roof. Just like linoleum.
Not quite, Jack.
What is it?
Not quite. Ask the engineer.
Teflon fiberglass.
Teflon
coated fiberglass.
held up by air?
That's right. Just like a giant balloon that you put over a
Swimming
swimming
pool.
pool.
Fancy door locks to go in and out?
Yes.
10 acres.
Oh dear.
10 acres. 10
acres
in
of
one,
this?
of that, one roof.
All in one piece?
It'd be the largest one in North America.
Costing how much the roof?
Because of the fact of that Canadian football is one-third bigger than American football. Costing about $7.5 million roof alone.
Well, I must say the stadium looks like a pretty good concept, right? It's clean, all set to go. BC Place, you've got a firm deal with Marathon.
Yes.
Transpo, what's going to be in it?
That's something that evolves over time. You start with an idea of a World's Fair on transportation. The idea is man and motion, the movement of goods, people, ideas. You'll have nations coming and deciding how they're going to show what they do best, whether it's a space chamber, whether it's a mock-up of a NASA thing.
And of course, with the approval of Mr. Rodgers and his government here, the LRT will be fully financed and in operation, the most modern, best possible system. If Bill Vander Zalm makes up his mind over the heads of the local officials.
Well, that's for you and Bill Vander Zalm to sort out, because it's not within our mandate at BC Place to build a LRT, although we're making provisions for it in all our engineering and all our designs, but that's Mr. Vander Zalm's, and I know he's one of your frequent guests, so you can
Not
ask
that
him.
frequent. Gentlemen, people, I've done my best to kind of give you the broad concept of this. Firm deal with the CPR. Stadium goes ahead, financed by the provincial government. BC Place goes ahead. And Alvin Narod and company and Rodgers are quite convinced they can flog enough property and make enough money to make the whole thing stand on its own feet. Is that putting it simply?
That's correct.
And Paul Manning stuck with the job of getting Transpo 86 off the ground come hell or high water. One segment of calls. I don't know what about, but about this. Just let's try one segment, see what we've done in the way of a selling job for Mr. Rodgers, Mr. Narod, and
George Blount.
Mr. Manning after the break. I remember when Stephen Rodgers was an Air Canada pilot, and he spoke good, simple English. A minute ago, he says to me, "Oh, BC Place will be much enhanced if we have a BC Hydro presence there." What did you mean? A presence? A ghost?
No, I don't think I mean a ghost.
Did you mean, answer the question yes or no, that if you can get the BC Hydro to move its head office into BC Place, that'll be a good big chunk of something?
Are you suggesting I didn't speak properly when I was driving that airplane, Jack? I
No,
can't. All right,
you spoke properly then. You don't speak properly
I
now.
see.
You're a
Okay.
politician.
Okay. Yes, I'm suggesting that if we can get BC Hydro to build their new corporate headquarters at BC Place, and therefore free, because we've taken the property that they put aside for their new corporate headquarters, if we can get them to build their new corporate headquarters, about 1 million square feet at BC Place, then that'll serve as a major
Who else?
anchor tenant.
What other presences would you like there from provincial tenants?
We'd like the feds there. Is that simple enough for you?
No, Bassford was beaten. Remember he was going to build it downtown?
Yes. But we think it's a good place for them to be.
Okay, a brief telephone session on this. Go ahead, please.
Hello?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. I would like to ask a question. I want to ask the two gentlemen where the priority lies in BC. Spending the amount of money that you are spending. In BC, we have about 1,000 families coming in. We don't have housing for them.
Okay, where is your priority in relation to housing with a 0.1 vacancy rate in Vancouver?
Well, our mandate was to build a stadium and to prepare this piece of land, and we're going to follow what our mandate. And where's Vancouver going to be without a stadium?
I don't know. There is housing in BC Place.
We hope to have as many as 20,000 people living there as quickly as possible.
That's not 20,000 units. That's 6,000 units.
That's about 10,000 units.
10,000 units. Go ahead from Prince George.
Yes, hello. I agree with BC Place, but I would like to say, why not bring it to Prince George? Because Prince George has nothing for tourists.
Okay, ma'am, why not bring it to Prince George?
I think it would be difficult to get the 60,000 people to Prince George to watch the games.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Mr. Webster. With the project of BC Place and Transpo 86, what's going to happen with the so-called Canby Street Bridge?
What?
Canby Street Bridge, Alvin Narod. That disastrous old bridge which has been there 1,000 years.
The city of Vancouver are doing studies about replacing it or altering it to better suit its function by changing the ramps to the north end.
But the bridge is not within your orbit.
That's correct.
Crossing the creek is none of your business.
That's correct.
Good, let's keep it to the facts. Go ahead, please.
Yes.
That's you.
Yes, okay. Yes, I'd like to ask your guests there if they can tell me that with the planning of the downtown stadium, if there was a geologist survey taken.
Oh, the footings.
Yes.
Hold on, please. The footings. There
Yes.
was a panic about that a while ago.
There were comprehensive tests taken.
You're quite happy with the footings?
Yes.
In fact, your news media missed that. We had drill holes being done all last summer and testing rigs down there, so we knew that, but we didn't bother telling anybody, so it wasn't featured on the evening news.
I don't know what that remark is supposed to mean.
Well, it's just that we managed to do it in secret without you people finding out about it, because we knew this was a criticism.
We
of
found out about other things.
I know you did.
But you didn't want BC TV News out did.
No, you weren't the fellows that found out.
Oh, yes. Your Attorney General was on here not so long ago admitting certain things were correct. I wouldn't raise that ghost if I were you. How's the $1,000 bill business these days? Go ahead, please.
You get more of them than I do.
Hello?
Speak up, please.
Yeah, I think another point should be made that these private lands, these lands going over to private enterprise will bring more revenue to the people
That's yours.
through taxes and that, but we haven't developed.
Oh, just that raises a very important point. If you sell land, of course, to private developers on the north shore of Halls Creek, that will be taxed on behalf of the city or on behalf
Oh, yes.
The city will get the
The city will
taxes.
get taxes from private developments.
Will the other presence, provincial presence, will they pay taxes to the city? Will all the buildings in this BC place pay taxes to the city?
I don't think that the stadium, the amphitheater, will be paying taxes. We consider that a park in the same sense for the use of the people, and therefore it shouldn't pay taxes. If we build some science centers, that sort of facility, those probably won't be. But the majority of buildings will be built, probably 80% of the buildings will be built by private enterprise, and those will be fully taxed.
The revenue-producing buildings
Yes.
for trade or commerce will pay taxes. From Assayas, please.
Yes. I have a couple of points. I don't know if they've been mentioned yet or not. I've been waiting to set for a moment. But how are we going to move 60,000 people per hour in and out of the downtown core? Especially, over and above the traffic that's already moving in the area. Also, the dome made of that light material, is that not going to radiate an awful lot of noise from big games across the creek?
Okay, you've got two good questions. One, the noise from the stadium.
There'll be noise, but fortunately at this stage there aren't a lot of people living around that area. Those people who choose to come and live there will know that there's noise, so they'll have to accept it. The other question, we don't anticipate that 60,000 people will be approaching it in an hour. The reason it's downtown is so that we can take advantage of the fact that there'll be a lot of people who will stay downtown after working hours and walk to the game, or they'll come down early and have dinner, and or they'll go after the game and go to a bar.
Certainly change the face of downtown Vancouver.
Yeah, but a lot smaller cities deal with very much larger crowds.
Gentlemen, I'm grateful for your presence here this morning, and also the fact that you were here. Stephen Rodgers, Minister in charge of BC Place, Paul Manning, Coordinator for Transpo 86, whether Harcourt likes it or not, and Alvin Narod, the man in charge of the entire construction. Put an outside price on it. Guess.
The whole thing?
Yeah.
Oh, it'll be over $1 billion.
Over $1 billion.
But not from the public.
But not from the public.
That was a good cue, Paul. Thank you very much. Next, a man causing trouble in London about our constitution by the name of Duke Redbird. After the break. As if there isn't going to be trouble enough over the Constitution, with the fights between the provinces and the feds, and the fights between the provinces and the feds on the budget, we know now that the presence of Native Indian leaders and Metis leaders in London is giving the British government some considerable second thoughts on returning the Constitution the way Pierre wants it tailored and sent back. I haven't met this man now for 10 or more years, isn't that right, Duke?
That's right, yeah.
This is Duke Redbird, who represents the Ontario Métis.
That's right.
And you're also a member of the Native
Council of Canada.
Were you in London recently?
Yes, I was there just the other day.
What were you doing? What kind of reception did you get?
Well, we got a polite reception from the press. What the meeting was, it was the three national Native leaders were there to meet with the President to speak on the Constitution and to try to lobby the British public in terms of stopping the Constitution from being repatriated until native rights are entrenched.
Harry Daniels.
That's right.
What's his position?
He's the President of the Native Council of Canada.
Yourself?
I'm the President of the Ontario Métis Non-Status Indian
And who else?
Association. Del Riley.
Who's he?
President of the National Indian Brotherhood.
Did you approach the British government directly with your concerns?
Well, we talked with Bruce, a member of Parliament, Bruce George, Labour member of Parliament in the opposition, and he was taking our case toward the to the British Parliament.
And did you go to the British newspapers?
Oh, they were all there. Yeah.
What did they do for you?
Well, they gave us a polite reception, but I think the kind of story that they were getting was sort of preserved native rights the way you would preserve the whales or the seals or something. They
In
weren't
other words, the
taking it very
British
seriously.
Fleet Street newspaper man tends to look on you as a kind of quaint survival of the frontier days.
That's
the
right.
pale skin versus red face, or red skin versus
Exactly.
pale face.
Exactly.
It's been so long since I used that phrase, I forget. Now, what do you, how many Métis are there in the country? And for the benefit of those who don't know, which may be a legion, what is a Métis?
Métis is a person with Indian and white ancestry, and there's about 1.5 million.
You used to be quite a troublemaker in the old days. Have you calmed down a lot now?
Well, I think that in the old days we had to put our ideas out in a different way. Now we have to work in a more comprehensive manner.
Well, how can you expect to take part, really, in the constitutional talks if the Native Indian Brotherhood can't even be represented from the Yukon or the Northwest Territories or anywhere else, and they're made just to sit in the back seats as observers? What do you really want?
Well, we want to be recognized as a founding people in Canada. We don't believe that the French and the English are the only founding nations. We were here first. We were participating in the opening up of Canada. We brought Manitoba into Confederation, and we've been left out of the process. We just want our rights entrenched in the Constitution. We want to be recognized as a founding people.
Are you talking about the Aboriginal rights, or are you talking about the Métis, who are a mixture of both white and Indian, right?
I think we have a birthright to the Aboriginal rights. We have the same rights as the Indian people.
Wouldn't that finish carving up the country into odd little bits and pieces? If you get some kind of land settlement as Métis, everybody from here to the head of the lakes will be claiming Métis ancestry, won't they?
Well, that would be really fine, because if everyone in Canada claimed Métis ancestry, we'd have a Métis country, which is what we're looking for.
Are there not many people like that who do claim Métis ancestry, who are taking whatever passes for a full part in federal provincial affairs?
Well, there's more all the time. They're coming out of the closet. At one time, after the Riel resistance, it was like Culloden. The tribes were broken down, the associations were broken down, but we're building back up, and we're asking for our rightful place in Canadian history and Canadian Confederation.
But what do you want, Duke? I mean,
we want to participate completely and totally in the fabric of Canada. We want to sit on those decision-making policy boards in places where our people are being affected, and yet we have no participation in the decisions.
Are you not free right now to take full part in the provincial or the federal functioning of the country?
No, of course not.
Tell me why not.
Well, the manner in which the federal and the guarantees to the French and the guarantees to the English have divided the country up, they are the people who participate. I mean, we have been left out of that process. Now,
do you want a separate, well, I've got to put it even simpler, do you want a separate Métis nation?
I think that we want to be able to have guaranteed seats in the legislature for Native people.
Now, we're talking about all Native people.
That's right.
Do the Indians accept you as part of their cause?
Oh, yes, very much so. This is a recent development. You know, the idea that there was treaty Indians and registered Indians and so on, that was brought about by the Indian Act. That has nothing to do with the Native people themselves. And there's a lot of Native families who are status, non-status, and Métis all in the same family.
No, I don't mean to be unsympathetic in any way, shape, or form, because I've seen in some documentaries, and you've told me some horror stories about the way Métis have been living in northern Saskatchewan, mostly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well,
Manitoba,
Saskatchewan,
Ontario,
Alberta, Ontario, yeah.
Neglected.
That's right.
Out of the mainstream of the development of the country?
That's right. Without any protection at all, because at least the Treaty Indians have protection under the British North America Act. They have the Indian Act. But the Métis, who are, as far as the general public is concerned, are Indians, have no protection whatsoever. We've been left at the whim of the provincial governments, who really have no interest in Native affairs whatsoever, except for the kind of money that they can get from the feds to develop social programming and so on in the province.
Well, that's been the problem all the time between the federal and provincial government, and on land grants, in particular land claims in British Columbia. You don't make any land claims as such.
Well, we certainly do. We have a lot of land claims. When Manitoba was brought into Confederation, the Métis people were guaranteed millions and millions of acres. The fact was that the government never came through with the land. They gave script instead. They gave a piece of paper that said someday in the future there'll be land made available for you. The script was worthless.
Was this before or after what you quaintly call the Riel Resistance?
It was after the Riel Resistance.
Used to call it the Riel Rebellion, didn't they?
Well,
is that an old colonial term?
Well, that's the colonials. That's what they called it. But we simply were resisting white encroachment on our legal lands, entitlement to them.
Do you ever think this country will ever get together in one piece?
Not after observing the provincial federal talks in Ottawa. It looked like the provincial premiers were a bunch of mean dogs around a very mean bone. They were trying to divide up the resources up, but they had no thought about the human element in Canadian Constitution. They didn't talk about people. They talked about resources.
What do you think Trudeau's up to? Do you think Trudeau's up to hammering home a unitary state where we're all one big brother together? Indians, Métis, French and English, except for this division about the French and English language rights.
Well, I think Trudeau sees himself as some great architect of a new Canadian world and bringing it into the 21st century, but I don't think he is taking into consideration that there are more opinions around about how that should be done than just his own.
Do you think the British, this guy you were talking to, Bruce George, is a Labour MP backbencher, isn't he?
That's right.
Any more encouragement from anybody else in the House of Commons in London?
Lord Grey was there giving us a polite hearing. There are some other MPs around. I'm not, overly impressed with a Labour backbencher taking the forefront, because I don't want to see Bruce George become Bruce of the Breeds, like Lawrence of Arabia or Gordon of Khartoum. I think we have a job to do, and that Bruce George has opened the doors for us, but I don't see him as the great white champion for our cause in London. I think we have to get our own people over there lobbying the British MPs.
Well, I've learned a lot in the 33, 34 years I've been in this country, and one is that nothing will ever be settled. Don't you feel like yourself? Do you think the Brits might turn down the Trudeau deal?
I think they might. I think Trudeau is looking forward to that, so he can come back to Canada and have a Canadian referendum and say, are we going to allow those Brits to interfere with our Constitution in Canada?
You better watch how you do that, or all the WASPs in Ontario will vote against them, because there's still a Brit connection with many of the WASPs.
Well, I know, but he's got Davis on his side now, and he's got the NDP working for him, so...
well, the NDP are now embarrassed, and Davis may change his mind. You never can tell.
Well, let's keep our fingers crossed.
Okay, I'm glad you came in this morning, Duke. I'll let you go now, and just to add to your confusion about the Constitution, the Métis are joined in concert with the Native Indian Brotherhood and the Native Indian Council to do the best they can to stop Trudeau from getting the Constitution back the way he wants it from the House of Commons in London. Thank you. Next, we're going to talk to Myrna Kostash about the 60s, if you were alive then. I was barely alive. After the break.
I'm sorry.
Myrna Kostash from Edmonton.
Correct.
Has written a book which is a story of the 60s generation in Canada. I was already a reporter in these days, Myrna, and probably stood on the sidelines and nagged and snarled about what I thought was a waste of a lot of public money. And they're going to give you another microphone because that one apparently isn't working.
How can they tell?
Well, we'll just keep going until you stop fiddling with your There we go. Count up to 10.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5.
Okay.
Un, deux, trois.
They can do it all now. Okay, Myrna, what did you do in the 60s and what have you made of it in your book, A Long Way From Home?
I was a hanger-on. I was one of hundreds of thousands of people who sort of hung around the edges of what the sort of core group of activists were doing. Which is to say, I went to love-ins, which is to say I went on demonstrations, and I had posters up on my wall, you know, that went to the rock concerts, and felt like it was the most passionate and celebratory and exuberant time of my life. I'm, in retrospect, very, very grateful to have grown up in that period. It was dynamite. It was international. There were hundreds of thousands of us out on the street.
So you were one of the generation whom Pierre Trudeau told, travel across the country on your unemployment insurance, pick up your LIP grants, pick up your this grants, your that grants, see the country, experience life.
Glad you mentioned the LIP grants, because in fact that was Trudeau's idea, it wasn't our idea, and it was a very cunning maneuver on the part of the government to introduce grants into this kind of movement, because a lot of people got siphoned off as a result of it. And in a way I can't blame them, because you know, you spend years working in an organization or movement and you're on a shoestring budget, you can't afford to pay the rent, the phone company is on your back asking you about the phone bills and so on. Here along comes Papa government with the possibility of doing all this with some money. And I think it's unfortunate that happened, because I think we lost a lot of our movement people.
You're saying that was it Trudeau? Yes, it was Trudeau. It was Trudeau in the early days in this government, was it not? And they started lashing out, and I used to spend hour after hour on the air denouncing some of the really stupid ones, such as the, what did they call them? Carrot growing communes at Seashelt.
You got a better idea?
It was a good way to get money into the hands of the disaffected middle class, I suppose, and buy them off and shut them
Exactly,
up.
I think that's precisely what happened. Not everybody was bought off, though. And what really has impressed me as a result of doing this book is that there are still, a couple of hundred of people who are at work, really doing hard, serious work. And I was really interested in what Duke Redbird said about that. That back in the 60s, people were spectacular. The times were spectacular. We were young, you know, we were hotheads, but we had some serious ideas behind that, and they're coming to fruition now with people like Duke working seriously, quietly, steadily over the long haul.
You know perfectly well as I do that most of the disaffected, many of the disaffected, I didn't mention this to Duke, were quietly and have still been bought off by the Secretary of State's department, which still hands out all kinds of money for all kinds of this and all kinds of that. Are you suggesting they might still be doing that to defuse any other trouble that might be building up?
Well, it's a time-honored method. You know, you provide a career for somebody who has come to your attention, who seems bright, and who may pose some kind of problem to you if he stays permanently outside the structure. But my line on that kind of people is sort of, if you're a chartered accountant now, by God, you were always a chartered accountant, even if you grew long hair and smoked dope, right? And I admit there are all kinds of people come in and out of movements like that. But that's not; those aren't the people I'm really concerned about.
So you were a loving child, a rock and roll child. You got into the dope a little bit. And you thought you were going to save the world from what, Vietnam?
Well, Vietnam was just an example of what we were trying to save the world from. You know, it was...
What did it make you? I mean, you're now a member of the establishment.
I don't consider being a writer a part of the establishment. Neither does the income tax department. You know, the establishment basically hasn't changed. And I will agree with you, what happened in the 60s was not revolutionary. I'm not making claims it was revolutionary. Revolution is a serious upheaval, and that isn't what happened. But what happened was that young people, a whole generation right around the world, was challenging the arrangement, the status quo, and raising very basic and interesting questions about the way we lived our lives. You talked about growing carrots on a commune. It sounds funny now, but what it was a challenge about how our food is processed and who owns our food and who owns our land. I mean, those are the questions lurking behind all those activities.
Some of the LIP grantees, I'm quite sure, bought themselves nice pieces of land, which they have since flogged for large sums of money.
Grant? It was nothing, John. I mean, you couldn't get rich on a LIP grant.
It depended how you handled it. I have documents, bundles and hundreds of thousands of dollars. Nobody knew what had been spent where and for what and for why. You know that as well as I do.
That's true. But that was a bureaucracy intervening into the movement.
Oh, they had all kinds of civil servants trying to certify checks, and nobody ever certified anything.
Well, this is one of the differences between the Canadian and the American movement. You know, there wasn't the same kind of bureaucratization among the Americans.
I remember myself being quite warmly welcomed welcoming to the original conscientious objectives from the United States. But the caliber of person who came into the country rapidly became downgraded into a bunch of deadbeats, didn't they?
Who are you referring to?
Those who crossed the border before the amnesties.
What, the draft dodgers?
No, I didn't mind the conscientious objectors, which I call the draft dodgers. I objected to them. Oh, I saw much of them. I chased a few of them around, finding out what they were doing in the country. Didn't we open the borders a wee bit too wide then?
All we did was applied regular immigration laws. No special law. That's the truth. There was never any special legislation on behalf of people avoiding the draft.
Nobody even bothered to check in at the border. They just crossed the border and then they got their amnesties later on.
Listen, I've gone through those stories. They came through the border. They were terrified. They had their hair cut short in order to get through the border, right, to get their points. I was telling them about the white faces. They were scared.
They're just taking the beards off.
Mm.
Well, we had some beauties, I'll tell you. In
the deserters were different. The deserters, you know, probably have to sneak across the border because there are laws pertaining to people who are actually within the armed forces.
What was the name of that hotel, Hotel Hilton in Vancouver? What was it we called was it the Seaforth Armories? What was it? You must have stayed there if you were hanging around the fringes in those days.
No, I wasn't in Vancouver.
You went in Vancouver?
No.
Oh, it was one of the noisiest. Were you in some small little quiet prairie town?
I was in Toronto.
Toronto. Oh, you must have been in that huge place where they had all the trouble with the drugs.
Rochdale.
Was it Rochdale?
You know what Rochdale is now? It's a home for senior citizens.
That was the place where the Mounties or the Toronto police used to come in bashing heads. Isn't that right?
Yeah, it was. That was near the end of that whole period, and some of it was violent and disturbing. And I agree, that's what happened at Rochdale. The speed dealers got in, and the bikers, and it was a really mean place.
How many of the kids became casualties?
A lot in the drug movement. But you see, that was the easiest thing to get involved in. Anybody could grow their hair long and hang around Yorkville and smoke a little dope, and a lot of those people got ripped off and burned. But at the heart of it was something really serious.
What was really serious?
Like this challenge I'm telling you about.
What challenge?
The challenge to our everyday assumptions about the way we live our lives here. Like
has it changed anything?
Yes, it has.
What?
There are all kinds of areas in which the stuff that was raised in the 60s continues to be dealt with in our lives. One is the Native Peoples movement, the women's movement, gay rights movement, regionalism. I see regionalism coming out of the 60s. The fact that people outside the center of this country can rise up and say, wait a minute, let's rethink our political structures. That hadn't occurred to anybody before the 60s.
I think it had occurred to people before. It happened in the 30s, it happened in the 40s, it happened in the 50s, and it happened. What makes you think you had any kind of stranglehold on changes in the system?
I will
You're
agree.
very snobbish about the whole business. What did you do from the 60s that became positive?
Well, I just listed them all.
Give me them again.
The Native rights movement, the women's movement, the gay rights movement, regionalism.
Do you think
How about independent Canadian unions? There's another one that came out of the 60s.
No, it didn't. And it's still not a success, independent Canadian unions.
It's a struggle. Nobody ever said this was going to be easy.
No.
We've got the whole back of the world the whole weight of the world on our backs. Nobody said it was going to be easy. But now we have a sense of the long haul, right? Like it's going to take long,
Regionalism.
serious
Trudeau
work.
would walk away with a referendum tomorrow on federalism, wouldn't he?
So I'm saying the alternative is being debated.
In fact, many of you turned off of politics altogether, except for a kind of loosely esoteric interest in the left wing.
That's not true.
Where are the active people in the young left-wing movement today? Where's the sense of injustice in this country
I've listed
today?
100 people in the front of my book who are still at work at this stuff.
I can't see any burgeoning movement of young people out of the 60s who are leading the drive into decency and humanity in the 80s and 90s.
I've just listed all the places in which we're working, and to me that's exactly where our best
Gay
hope
rights,
is.
women's lib.
Right.
Where's some of the dynamism in the political parties?
The new left was never
parties?
in the political parties. That's the whole point about a movement. You do not put a political party together
I don't think
again.
you achieved anything out of the 60s, and you may have made some improvement with gay rights, women's lib and whatnot, but it's got no permanent effect on society.
Well, that remains to be told, or it remains to be seen. I think the women's movement has completely turned this society on its head.
Give me an example.
Well, the assumptions that women make now about what's possible for their lives. You do not have family life anymore. You have, the ways in which women work now. The authority of the patriarch in the family has been smashed.
Well, I hope you're right. And I hope you're wrong. but I don't think you know what you're talking about any more than I do. You're a long way from home, and so am I, after the break. Myrna Kostash, I think I was unfair to you. I think I'll agree with you. One, that you people out of the 60s, and the women's lib, for what it's worth, have destroyed family life. And I have no doubt that you will tell me that this phony multiculturalism is also a great thing brought out of the 60s.
Multiculturalism comes out of that thing that happened in the 60s, which was a challenge to WASP, you know, the WASP hegemony, dominance of this country.
The WASP
hegemony. It's a good word.
It is a good word.
Yeah.
H-E-G-E-M-O-N-Y.
One G.
That's what I said, H-E-G-E-M-O-N-Y.
Okay, right. The notion that there were other peoples in this country besides the English,
The
middle
Scots.
class, yeah, what's called the
Irish.
Anglo-Celtic, right? A lot of it's like countercultural. Like to be a Ukrainian in the West is to be countercultural, because the majority culture has been evolved and worked out and defined by
I think you're
male
very
wasps,
nice.
you know?
I think you're a very nice person. I can't say woman.
Why not? It's
Oh,
exactly
that's
what
a
I am.
sexist remark.
It's
No,
not
you're
a
a person.
sexist.
Yes, it is.
To deny that I am a woman is sexist. To say that I'm just like you is sexist.
You're a very nice person. But I want to tell you my view of multiculturalism. I think it's a very clever political ploy into which many millions of Canadian taxpayers' dollars are poured down the drain to create ethnic bloc voting in a clever move by the establishmento. Do you not
There have been
agree with
maneuvers
me?
and responses to that demand that ethnic people have raised about taking their part and their place.
If
in
I
the
have an
society.
ethnic,
It's not the total story.
what is a thing if I have an ethnic thing?
It's a legitimate demand. Like it started out originally from the communities, you know, from the massive ethnic people, and the same thing that happened in the 60s became interfered with by the bureaucracy.
People rushing about saying, I must go to the Secretary of State and get money to buy a pair of bagpipes and a new kilt to maintain my
Excuse me, it was the
ethnic...
Secretary of State who decided that that was going to be the response to ethnic demand.
I'm saying it's a
Not
political...
everybody's been impressed either, by
I'm
the way,
saying
and
it's a
not
political
ethnic
response.
bloc voting. Do you know that ethnics are just as diverse politically as anybody else?
I'm sure they are. But I have a strong suspicion that multiculturalism money is used to encourage the fact that the master is there and you better vote for the master.
I'm as cynical about it as you, and I think a lot of money has been put into folk festivals as though that was what was being demanded, that we could have our chance to dance in our costumes. I mean, a lot of people have been bought off by that, I agree.
Sure
with
they
you.
have, and I don't like it. I'd like to see, just to chat for a couple of minutes, and I know I'm totally out of step, totally old-fashioned, and please forgive me. I'd like to see this country homogenized, just like milk.
What would that look like?
I don't care what it would look like. It would look very nice. I'd like to see intermarriage, interbreeding, one homogeneous Canadian
That's a very
population.
old dream. People used to say we wouldn't have a racial problem if we all intermarried. We'd all be, what, some shade of light brown or something?
Wouldn't it be a hell of a lot easier? Give everybody the same rights, the same opportunities.
As what, though? Like, always
As
that kind of thing
Canadians.
is, what's that, you know, like, always that's been defined in terms of one single culture. If you could all be like me, is really what the statement has been.
No, I'm willing to change.
I'd rather go for this kind of diversity and all these different possibilities of being a human being.
But the different possibilities of being a human being are entirely in the hands of the human being, surely to goodness.
Exactly, the liberated human being.
Well, now, who isn't liberated?
The human being
Who isn't liberated that wants to be liberated?
Oh, goodness. The human being on unemployment, the human being, you know, with...
The human being on welfare,
the human being
who's
who's
a Métis
unwell,
in
the
northern
human
Saskatchewan.
being next to a nuclear waste plant is not liberated.
You're dealing with specifics. I'm dealing with generalities.
No, those are very important specifics. Precisely the ways in which we can't be free to be
What do you
and
want,
me.
nuclear power or acid rain? Take your choice.
Oh, God.
Or do you want to stop growth? Do you want to turn back the clock?
It's stopping on its own accord.
Who
I mean,
says so?
how
Do you
much,
realize how much it costs to buy a house in Vancouver now?
how much longer can 6% of the world consume 90% of the resources?
Until the bomb is dropped. You don't really think that we're going to live in peace and harmony on this earth from now until the end of time, do you?
I surely do not. I surely do not think we'll
And you
live in
don't
peace
trust
and
the
harmony.
Russians any more than you trust the Americans, do you?
No, I don't. As a Ukrainian, I do not.
And you don't trust Trudeau any more than you... Oh, you're a racist on that ground.
Racist?
Ukrainians.
Ukrainians are not.
You don't like
What?
the Russians on principle?
Ukrainians have historical grievances against the Russians. Sure, that's not news to you.
Of course it's not news to me.
Same with the Scots versus the English. The
Long
Irish
gone.
versus the English. Long gone, you say.
Scots and English, long gone.
Scots moved themselves over to Ireland.
That was about 400 years ago.
Yes, and look where we're all at today in Ireland. I
And
don't
there
think
was
these
very nearly in the 60s a damn good chance to make peace in Ireland, except for the extremists on both sides. That woman, what, Bridget?
Bernadette Devlin.
Bernadette Devlin, and then the equally dreadful person on the other side, Paisley. And in the 60s in the Queen's University, had it been given half a chance, they had a very good chance to get together. But the extremists whipped it up.
Well, whatever. The point is that that's been far from resolved.
Never will be, I've got news for you.
Let's see.
It's like the Serbs and the Croats. But the Scots and the English, that's over. We don't like them and they don't like us. I'm only
Agreed
joking.
on that one.
No. Some of my best friends are Englishmen. Freddie the Ford director has got one of these whining accents you could cut with a knife. But I can make a joke about an Englishman, Sage of Fink, and we can laugh. Can't make a joke about an Irishman, or a Pole, or a Russian, or a Ukrainian, or Chinese, or anybody else that I'm accused to be a racist.
Well, you know, it depends who's making the joke.
Well, all my jokes are funny. I haven't laughed enough this morning. I think you saddened me a little bit. Your book is good. It's depressing.
Oh no, I'm upset that you say that because to me it was an exhilarating enterprise.
Well, you lived through it.
To go back through that stuff and realize that people are still doing really good, solid work.
What was the greatest fun you ever had in the 60s?
I don't think I could tell it. I had some very nice moments. I presented a flower to Leonard Cohen at a Love-In in Queen's Park.
Did you?
I have a photograph to commemorate it too.
And that's a shining memory.
Well, it's a very Canadian moment, you'll have to admit.
Leonard Cohen. He's a poet or a writer.
And a singer,
or
yeah.
something. I'd have been more
and he's
impressed.
still at it too.
I'd have been more impressed if you presented it to Pierre Berton.
Who?
Or Charles Templeton. Or one of the establishment writers.
I wonder if they were even around for that.
Or Hardly Know It. Farley Mowat.
Farley Mowat. He was probably around.
Myrna, thanks very much. I'm sorry I was a bit off in the first segment. I wasn't really.
Well, I don't expect people to totally agree.
Or agree
with the
totally.
way I've represented that material.
My thanks to Myrna Kostash, who isn't that long away from home. She's from Edmonton. He is selling her book after the break.
Thanks for that.
Get that out. Morning, Gladys.
Good morning.
Like a new hairdo.
So do I.
Tomorrow we have a tape program.
On the Constitution.
Because tomorrow is Armistice Day, or Remembrance Day. It's November the 11th. And we're back here tomorrow morning, 9 a.m., and back live again on Wednesday morning.
Yes.
With Webster and Company, 9 a.m. precisely. What is BC Place all about, really? All you ever wanted to know about the Constitution.